Stardew Valley might have accidentally ruined farming games for you. Once you've seen everything Pelican Town has to offer, most alternatives feel like cheap copies trying to steal your nostalgia. The good news is that developers finally got weird with the genre. I found games that throw out the rulebook completely, letting you manage cults, fly on magic swords, and build massive factories. If you're looking for that specific feeling of losing track of time, these games actually pull it off. Rune Factory 4 Special. Most games in this genre treat combat as an afterthought. Here, it's the entire point. You're dropped out of a skyship, lose your memory, and suddenly you're running a town while beating up fantasy monsters. The bizarre part is that almost any monster you fight can be tamed and brought back to work on your farm. You can casually recruit a massive boss dragon to water your cabbages. The progression system tracks literally everything you do. You level up from walking, sleeping, and even bathing. The graphics definitely show their old handheld roots, and the menus can feel slightly clustered, but the sheer volume of things to do is completely unhinged. I spent an entire evening just forging slightly better boots so my pet goblin could survive a dungeon. Sunhaven. Imagine a farming simulator where you don't just use a watering can, you cast a rain cloud spell over your entire field. The developers took the classic life sim formula and injected it with maximum fantasy nonsense. You can play as an elemental, a demon, or an angel. The skill tree is aggressively massive, offering choices that fundamentally break the game in your favor. I genuinely wasn't expecting to manage 3 entirely different farms across different dimensions simultaneously. It gets a little overwhelming trying to remember which mystical town needs your attention on any given day, but casting a fireball to harvest your wheat somehow never gets old. You slowly become a magical powerhouse who just happens to enjoy growing tomatoes on the side. Coral Island. Tropical settings usually mean a relaxing vacation, but this game puts you straight to work cleaning up an ecological disaster. You spend half your time on land growing crops, and the other half deep sea diving to heal corrupted ocean floor. The weirdest part is how quickly you get invested in trash collection. Clearing out oily sludge to watch marine life return is incredibly satisfying. You even run into a whole kingdom of mermaids down there. The island itself is massive, and the character models look almost too good for a farming game. It still has some rough edges and occasional bugs from its ongoing development updates. Still, turning a polluted wasteland into a thriving island paradise feels like a massive accomplishment. Research story. Nobody warned me that playing a fantasy scientist would be this addictive. Instead of just buying seeds and planting them, you actually have to study everything first. You track down wild plants and weird creatures, observe their behavior, and write it all down before you can domesticate them. It feels like completing a Pokédex, but for agriculture. You learn what soil conditions a specific mystical flower needs by watching it grow in the wild. The pacing is a lot more methodical than your average farm sim. The user interface takes a bit of getting used to, especially when managing your notes, yet slowly building a massive archive of biological research gives you a totally different reason to wake up every morning in-game. My time at Sandrock. Building things in a lush green valley is easy. Trying to build a thriving workshop in a post-apocalyptic desert where water is literally more valuable than gold is a totally different problem. You're basically a mechanic trying to save a dying town from completely turning into dust. You spend hours tearing apart old-world relics just to build basic machines. The resource scarcity totally changes how you play. You can't just cut down trees because the town will literally fine you for destroying the sparse environment. It takes a powerful rig to run smoothly, and the load times can occasionally test your patience, but upgrading your dusty little yard into a massive industrial complex while surviving sandstorms feels like a massive flex. Cornucopia. The moment I realized you could put your farm animals into little hats and enter them into races, I knew this game was completely unhinged. It uses this weird but charming 2.5D paper cutout art style that looks like nothing else out there. The farming mechanics go weirdly deep with a massive composting system that lets you customize the exact soil composition for your crops. You can grow explosive vegetables, you can fight bizarre enemies in combat minigames. The tone is completely chaotic, and the tutorial
tutorials do a terrible job of explaining half the wild mechanics they throw at you. Somehow, tossing rotten food into a machine to engineer the perfect fertilizer for a giant pumpkin just works. Fields of Mistria. If you grew up watching 90s magical girl anime, this aesthetic will hit you like a truck. The developers nailed that specific pastel, nostalgic look, right down to the character portraits. It's still in early access, so you'll definitely hit the end of the current content faster than you might want, but the foundation here is ridiculously solid. Animals have actual genetics, meaning you can breed specific colors and patterns. You also get a town of characters that actually feel alive, rather than just walking dialogue dispensers. Using basic magic to speed up your daily chores makes the whole experience feel incredibly smooth. You're basically rebuilding a fantasy town with the power of good vibes and selectively bred pink cows. Littlewood. Most RPGs end after you defeat the Dark Lord. This entire game happens after the world is already saved, and everybody's just trying to figure out what to do next. The craziest mechanic is how time works. The clock only moves forward when you actually perform an action, like chopping wood or picking a weed. You can stand still for 10 real-world minutes planning out your town layout, and the day won't advance a single second. It completely removes the stressful ticking clock that usually plagues life simulators. The graphics are extremely basic, and there's zero combat to speak of. It's purely about terraforming the land, placing houses exactly where you want them, and giving these retired heroes a nice place to live. Immortal Life. I genuinely wasn't expecting to play a game where farming is just a stepping stone to achieving actual immortality. This is a Chinese cultivation RPG where you manage a sect recovering from a disaster. You don't just water crops, you use ancient magical arts to summon localized rainstorms. The cooking minigames are shockingly detailed, requiring you to carefully balance ingredients to restore your spiritual energy. The translation can be a little clunky in spots, making some of the deeper lore hard to follow, but the fantasy of literally flying on a magic sword to go check on your cabbages completely overrides any minor translation issues. You slowly transform from a weak novice into a literal demigod of agriculture. Song of the Prairie. For reasons I still don't understand, this game lets you grow giant mutant crops that are bigger than your character. You don't just run a typical farm, you're basically running a magical agricultural experiment. The world has this weird energy that affects everything you plant. If you do things right, you harvest apples the size of boulders. The player freedom is pretty wild, letting you completely terraform the ground to build elaborate cliffside farms. The user interface feels pretty rough, and navigating your inventory takes way too many clicks, but riding around the map on the back of an oversized magical beast and throwing giant vegetables into shipping bins is a highly specific kind of fun. Dinkum. Take the relaxing island lifestyle of Animal Crossing, move it to the Australian outback, and add aggressive wildlife that constantly wants to eat you. That's Dinkum. You're tasked with building a town from scratch in the middle of nowhere. You convince people to move in by setting up businesses and hunting local bugs. The twist is that survival mechanics are heavily baked in. You'll be casually planting seeds one minute and sprinting for your life from a giant crocodile the next. It sounds stressful, but it actually adds a hilarious edge to the usual life sim routine. It definitely requires a lot of grinding to get your town looking decent. Building a thriving settlement while fighting off angry emus just hits differently. Fae Farm. If you hate managing a stamina bar and walking slowly across massive maps, this was designed specifically for you. The movement here is incredibly fast and fluid. You can double jump over fences, swim across rivers, and instantly swap tools without opening a menu. The game automatically knows if you're facing a rock or a plant and pulls out the right item. It makes the daily routine aggressively efficient. The trade-off is that the NPCs are pretty lifeless and the social aspect feels totally hollow. But if you just want to focus purely on the satisfaction of cleaning up a magical farm, brewing potions, and dungeon crawling with incredibly responsive controls, the streamlined mechanics are incredibly hard to walk away from.
Harvestella. Square Enix decided to make a life simulator, so naturally it includes a world-ending threat and extremely dramatic combat. Farming is actually the secondary focus here. You spend most of your time exploring massive, beautiful dungeons and fighting monsters in a surprisingly deep action RPG combat system. The twist is the season of death called Quietus that rolls in and destroys your crops between every regular season. It forces you to carefully plan your harvests so you don't lose everything. The actual farming grid is pretty small, and hardcore agriculture fans might find it a bit shallow. However, the story goes absolutely crazy with sci-fi elements and plot twists you'll never see coming. Novalands. This sounds ridiculous until you try it, but you can automate away almost the entire game. You start off doing everything by hand, breaking rocks and chopping weird alien trees, but eventually you build little bots to do the chores for you. Before you know it, you're managing a massive network of conveyor belts and robotic workers. You can even capture alien creatures and put them to work in your factories. It completely scratches that itch for ultimate efficiency. The map is broken up into these floating islands you unlock over time. The combat is pretty bare bones and mostly an afterthought, but standing back and watching an entire island run perfectly without you lifting a finger is wildly satisfying. Graveyard Keeper. This is basically the morally bankrupt evil twin of the genre. Instead of inheriting your grandfather's farm, you get hit by a car and wake up managing a medieval cemetery. To make money, you need to bury bodies, but to make real money, you start harvesting parts from those bodies to sell as mysterious meat to the local tavern. The tech tree is notoriously complicated, requiring you to juggle dozens of strange materials just to build a simple wooden plank. The grind is definitely intense, and the game rarely tells you what to do next, but accidentally creating a zombie workforce to mine stone while you give a fake sermon at your church is a completely unique experience. Ova Magica. Combining crop management with monster taming is a genius move. Instead of raising standard cows and chickens, you hatch these strange little blob creatures from eggs. These blobs are the entire focus of the game. You train them for turn-based battles, but you also assign them tasks back at your base. A water-type blob will handle your crops, while an earth-type might smash rocks. It perfectly blends the progression of a creature collector with daily chores. The visual style is very bright and bubbly, which might not be for everybody. The combat can also feel a bit repetitive early on, but slowly breeding an army of highly specialized blobs to automate your entire life is highly addictive. Roots of Pacha. Throwing out the concept of money completely changes how a life sim feels. You're playing in the Stone Age. You don't buy seeds from a store. You have to find wild plants and slowly domesticate them over generations. You don't upgrade tools with cash. You contribute ideas to your tribe until somebody invents the bucket. It makes every single upgrade feel earned because you're literally advancing human civilization. The social systems are fantastic, involving entire tribe festivals and rituals. The cave exploration can feel a bit tedious with its strange puzzle mechanics, but taming a wild mammoth and riding it back to a village you helped build from nothing is incredibly rewarding. Everafter Falls. You wake up in a simulation, realize your previous life was a lie, and immediately start farming with the help of a magical pet. This game gets weird fast. There's no stamina bar, which completely breaks the genre wide open. You can sprint around doing chores all day and night without passing out. Your pet is the real star here, learning spells and helping you dig, fight, and water plants. The progression relies heavily on a bizarre card-eating mechanic, where you permanently boost your stats. The art style looks a little bit like a Flash game from 2010, which might turn some people off, but the sheer amount of strange secrets hidden around the map keeps you constantly investigating. Lens Island. The first thing you'll notice is the heavy emphasis on building an actual fortress instead of a cozy farmhouse. You start on a tiny raft and end up constructing massive multi-story bases to defend against enemies that come out at night. The dungeon crawling is incredibly punishing, requiring you to actively dodge and manage weapon cooldowns. Farming is basically your life support system, giving you the food buffs needed to survive the caves. The map is handcrafted but huge, requiring you to repair old bridges and find hidden areas. The lack of a minimap can make navigation incredibly frustrating at times, yet slowly claiming an entire hostile island as your personal stronghold feels incredible. My time at Portia. Before Sandrock, there was Portia. You're given a massive workbench and told to outbuild every other workshop in a vibrant, post-apocalyptic world. The scale of the things you create is absurd. You go from making simple wooden boxes to constructing entire bridges and public transport vehicles for the city. You actually feel like a vital part of the economy. The combat is definitely clunky, and the voice acting is sometimes so bad that it wraps back around to being hilarious. The menus have that distinctly older, slightly jagged feel, but watching the town literally expand and change because of the commissions you completed gives you a sense of impact most modern games completely miss. Echoes of the Plum Grove. Survival is brutal, and eventually your character is gonna die. This game introduces a harsh generational system where diseases can sweep through your town and wipe out half the population, including you. When you die, you just take over playing as your kid and keep the family farm going. It uses a very cute paper cutout aesthetic that completely masks how ruthless the mechanics actually are. You have to aggressively hoard food for the winter, where you will literally starve. The movement speed is painfully slow, which makes getting around town a chore, but managing a bloodline and watching your family tree expand over decades makes every single harvest matter. Rune Factory 5. Moving from a top-down view to a fully 3D world was a massive leap for this series. You join a peacekeeping ranger group in a border town, which is just a convenient excuse to fight monsters and farm on the backs of giant floating dragons. The social events are fully voiced, and the characters have wild, unpredictable routines. You can team up with townsfolk and take them into dungeons to fight alongside you. The performance is notoriously rough, with frame rate drops that happen almost every time you leave a building. It definitely lacks polish, but the core loop of forging crazy weapons, dating anime characters, and growing turnips on a dragon remains weirdly captivating. Kynseed. Developed by people who worked on the Fable series, this has that exact same weird, dark British humor. You sign a contract with a mysterious fairy to get a magical acorn, and suddenly you're managing a generational legacy. You don't just run a farm, you can buy the local blacksmith shop, the tavern, and the apothecary. You hire staff and manage their schedules. Time moves forward, people age, and eventually you pass your legacy down to your children. The map is huge, and finding your way around the cryptic fast travel system takes forever. But exploring a world heavily inspired by creepy folklore while trying to run a profitable pie shop is a wild combination. Sakuna of Rice and Ruin. Most games simplify farming. This one demands you learn the actual real-world science of traditional Japanese rice cultivation. You play as a spoiled harvest goddess, banished to a demon island. Your combat stats are directly tied to the quality of your rice. You have to manage water temperature, soil nutrients, and weed control with punishing detail. It's basically an incredibly deep agricultural simulation mashed together with a fast-paced side-scrolling action game. The learning curve for the farming mechanics is incredibly steep, and the game refuses to hold your hand. But the moment you finally harvest a perfect crop and suddenly start destroying demons with ease, you feel absolutely unstoppable. Garden Story. Somehow, playing as a tiny, highly motivated grape charged with saving the world just works. You're the newly appointed guardian of the grove, trying to stop a mysterious rot from destroying the island. This is much closer to a classic Zelda game than a traditional farming simulator. You spend your days gathering materials, fighting blobs of rot, and completing requests to repair broken structures around the map. The farming elements are very light, mostly just planting seeds in specific spots to harvest materials later. The combat mechanics are a bit floaty and lack serious impact, yet the sheer charm of watching fruits and vegetables try to rebuild their society is completely undeniable.